I just wanted to welcome everyone into this space and thank you for showing up. I'm really happy to be here. Um, for those of you who don't know, you can see my name on the screen there. My name is Mary Clements, and I work with CMHA. And Rachel invited us to kind of have a presence here in the wellness webinars, specifically focused on chatting about mental health resources in this weird time that we're all coexisting in. So I'm just hoping to provide a space, a virtual space for us to hang out, and I'm certainly have some information that I can share, as well as hoping to hear from you folks. So I guess that leads to just a few little pieces of housekeeping, if you will, for those of you who aren't familiar. And I'm a bit rusty, but I believe that you can raise a hand, or you can, if you have something that you'd like to add, or if you'd like to share with audio, or you can always just give a wave. I think I have, between Rachel and I, we can see all the videos, or pop into the chat box there and we can bring it into our conversation. I certainly will leave some time at the end for us. So if you have something, I have reserved some time at the end of our chat if you have some questions or thoughts, but certainly feel free to ask along the way or discuss, or I would love that. Let me see, what else did I have to say about that? Yeah, and just if you can, be mindful to keep your mic muted. That's always a good virtual etiquette, mute on mute. And for those of you who don't have video, feel free to show your face. I love seeing your faces, but also if you're not comfortable with that, then that's totally cool. Yeah, I think those are, I don't know if you have anything else to add, Rachel, in terms of you have hosted these before, if there's anything important for folks to know.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. Typically what we do, if you have a question, you can send it into the chat box throughout. And then Mary, if you want to be checking that, I'll keep an eye on it too. But yeah, and then if you want to send anything directly to me that you want me to send in anonymously as Startup Zone as well, we can do that. But yeah, I think we're pretty good.
Super, thank you. And welcome to all the stragglers that are coming in. We're just getting started here, and I just gave an overview of kind of who I am and what we hope to do. More specifically, there are a couple of points that I did give to Rachel beforehand that I thought would be relevant to discuss, which includes just kind of telling you folks a little bit about CMHA and what we have, who we are, what we do. And then I kind of thought it would be important to talk about what exactly we mean by our mental health and wellness, and to have a discussion about that. In particular, talking about what do we mean exactly by being more aware, I guess, or paying attention to what our wellness signs and our warning signs are. So our signs of wellness, our signs potentially of unwellness or crisis, and kind of everything else that happens in between those two. So just to kind of scratch the surface of that, maybe get you thinking about how to recognize those different signs in yourself and others, especially right now when everything is, pretty stressed and strained. Having a hot moment to kind of check in on that and do some inventory. And kind of following up to that, I thought it would be helpful to think about what are some different kinds of support that we can give or receive through the lens of thinking about ourselves. So self-care, super buzzy word, but I think that's really helpful to unpack that a little bit. Also thinking about social care, and I use the other term as professional care. So kind of depending on where you are on that spectrum of your own wellness, knowing what you can lean into at any point along that kind of fluid spectrum that we all experience. And then before we go into a Q&A, I specifically wanted to touch base on some COVID-specific mental health resources. So just kind of give you an update in terms of CMHA, what we have on the go, as well as to just briefly point out and give some direction of referral to different options happening for mental health locally on PEI, and then of course online virtually, just to give you some starting points. And, you know, there's a lot of information that I could share. Again, I hope to not make this too much me talking at you. So if there is something that you wanted me to expand on, and or maybe you wanted a particular link, maybe just pop into the chat box, or I will pop into the chat box right now and leave my email so that you can just reach out directly instead of me, you know, reading off a list of different, there's a lot of resources. So I'll just do that right now, mclements@cmha.pe.ca. So if there are any questions during, after, you can reach out to me that way for sure. So just a quick little bit about me. Who is this person who is talking to you? So as I said, I work for CMHA. My role there is individual and family support, which is essentially helping folks kind of navigate resources, finding out what exists within our organization and elsewhere. Before coming to CMHA, and also currently I work as a mental health counselor. So that's kind of my background. I live in beautiful Murray River. I'm overlooking my snowy pond right now. I'm not sure how everyone else is feeling about the snow that's happening, or if you're having it where you are. I'm from PEI. I moved back. I'm one of those bouncer people, you know, left and came back. So spent a lot of time in Ontario and British Columbia, and came back for summer and never left. I was supposed to be here for just a summer, and I don't know, it's 4 years later. So I am very interested in both in my own life and work-wise, looking at mindfulness, practicing mindfulness, meditation, and also the healing kind of benefits of nature that I kind of gave in my bio if you had a chance to read it. But it gives you a little flavor of me. So actually, that's maybe a really good beginning. Would anyone be interested in just taking a moment to take a breath before we begin? I see some nods. So if you're not into it, then this is just a chill zone for you. You can chill out however you want, but maybe that's a good way for us to begin. I especially find it hard, or a different transition. I don't know how you all feel, and let me know. But I know that in my practice as a counselor, I was discussing recently with clients, and I'm sure it applies in other virtual meetings, that, you know, we're really missing that transition time. You know, there isn't, although I have learned about Zoom waiting rooms, I find that really helpful. I was noticing how different it is to show up to meetings and all of a sudden the person is just right there in front of you. I'm not sure if any of you know what I'm talking about, but I was talking about this with someone and kind of suggesting that, you know, you're missing some of the prep time or some of the transition time, at least for me, when I'm driving somewhere and I'm thinking about arriving there. Sometimes it feels like in the virtual world, it can be a bit more of an abrupt transition. So taking some time to honor that, I guess, and maybe create a little bit more of a pocket or bookending our virtual lives. So all of that is to say, let's actually arrive in this space together. So as comfortable as you can be and wherever you are seated, maybe sitting upright, bringing your spine a little bit more erect, and yeah, just kind of shaking it out and feeling it out. Feel the chair underneath you. If you can and want to and are able to, find the floor with your feet. And allowing whatever's underneath you, a chair, a couch, a bed, the ground, just feeling the support of that, so important right now. If you feel comfortable too, you could close your eyes. And just allowing ourselves to arrive into this space together. Feeling the support of the earth underneath you, the support of your body. And just taking a couple of breaths, leaving behind where you came from physically in your environment, in your space, any tasks, chores, other things, and just putting them aside mentally for now. And showing up in this moment with some breath. I always love the thought, we'll just do one more pair. And with this in-breath, take in anything you need for this next period of time. And on the exhale, it's an opportunity to let go of anything we don't need right now. And coming back into the virtual space, slowly and with your own pace and timing. I'm just wondering for anyone who participated, how that was for you. Feel free to share if you want to. I know that maybe you're a different animal now. If you're here in the beginning, we were talking about what animals are in this space. I know that my squirrel is feeling a little less squirrely. Anyhow, thank you for sharing in that. So I will now talk a little bit more about CMHA. So for those of you who don't know, it's actually I was really surprised think back in, let me check the dates here, like 1918 is whenever it was founded nationally. And so it's been in PEI since about 1959. There are different divisions all across Canada, all with a similar mandate and mission, and different kinds of programs at each organization. So on PEI, there's about over 150 volunteers and about 50 plus different staff. I work in the Kings County branch. But there are locations, so I'm based in Montecure's Three Rivers, and there are locations in Charlottetown, Summerside, and Alberton. So we have some different kinds of programs. Some of you might be familiar. Is anyone familiar with the Clubhouse program? Yeah, so Clubhouse is a psychosocial rehabilitation model. So that's for folks who specifically identify with a lived experience that may come with a diagnosis. And in those clubhouses, there's assistance for folks like with employment counseling and education resources. There's also some social and housing supports. But aside from clubhouses, we do offer individual and family support, as I said. So folks can call us and we it's almost like a matchmaking service to figure out what it is that you're looking for. Thing to note is that as an organization, we're a nonprofit and we are non-clinical. So as opposed to community mental health and addictions, which offer clinical services with psychologists, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, social workers, CMHA is a community-based program, but our services are run through the lens of employing folks with lived experience as one difference. And we offer emotional and social supports, but we don't offer any clinical counseling per se. But one program that I would love to just highlight, especially right now, and I'll circle back to it later, is the peer support program. Has anyone heard of the peer support program? Yeah, awesome. Tracy's heard of it. So that is it's pretty new on PEI, just over a year, I believe. And so again, peer support, they offer one-on-one sessions and they do groups as well, but the folks who are peer support workers relate to the people that they are chatting with or holding space with based on their own shared lived experience with mental health and recovery. So as opposed to seeing a psychiatrist or psychologist or a counselor, someone who would be sitting with a peer support worker would be more of a casual relationship. They certainly have training and enter it with a professional mindset. But the main foundational piece is that both folks have a similar life experience. So that is one of the newer programs that has been really popular and growing. And I see it as a really great complementary service for some people. They may need someone to just talk to or vent, or have a sounding board or someone to help kind of create a plan or strategy. It can be those things. It can be just really someone to just talk to. It can be someone to maybe some peer support workers go for coffee. It can be a social connection. So I think it's a really valuable resource that can be a standalone option for some folks who may not want or may not is applicable to them to have a clinical or support, or for some folks that kind of would wish to have that in addition to clinical support. So yeah, that's one of our really valuable pieces. Tracy is raising your hand.
There's just a question in the chat group that I feel should be addressed before we continue.
Yes. CMHA is mentioned. Is this geared towards the public, professionals helping professionals? What is this, Adam? Is this?
Oh, I guess I'm just the what is it? The CMHA, and I guess this peer program in general. Is this geared towards like the general population, or I was wondering if it's like licensed professionals that want to be seen by someone like a peer in that profession and they're talking on a non-clinical basis, or is this just
So continue? Yep.
is it just for anyone to walk in off the street? And
yeah, so it's a thank you for asking, and sorry for sorry that I missed those questions in the chat box. So all of our programs are open to anyone in the public. We're a community-based service, and we do have walk-in services. The referral is not necessary. So you can use, some folks do make an appointment and have an ongoing appointment, but you're welcome to just call. I mean, in times before our virtual world, you could just stop by. And again, I'll clarify, these folks are employed by CMHA. They do receive training, but the value of their contribution is not based on a credential, but rather having specific lived experience of mental health. Does that clarify? Cool. And I see Stacy has visited. Okay, awesome. Sorry to have missed you too. And I'm glad to hear you think it was a nice space. I love setting up spaces, so that was a really fun part to open that new office in Montague. Anyhow, so let's kind of scoot along because I don't want to take up too much time in this section, other than to say if you have questions about CMHA, you could definitely check out the website. What I didn't touch on is that we do some housing initiatives, and part of my role is doing things like this actually. So we do some different trainings and education pieces, both with community members and also organizations. So if you have any curiosities or questions, just hop onto the website or feel free to shoot me an email or pop it into the chat box, and I'll do my best to keep my eye on there. I'm gonna just scroll ahead, see what else I had to say. So I wanted to just move on to talking about what I had mentioned, which is learning how to recognize our signs of wellness and our signs of crisis, and everything else in between is kind of the bullet point I created. So I think it's worth talking about what do we mean exactly when we're talking about mental health. I mean, I have my own definition, but I would love to hear from any of you. What does mental health and wellness mean to you? I know for me, it has to do with a feeling of balance, I think. It has to do with, I like to think through the lens of, body, mind, heart, and spirit. So the way that my body is feeling and moving, mind being, the thoughts that I'm having, the way I'm thinking about the world, heart being my feeling and emotional state. And for me, spiritual is relevant. And of course, if it's not relevant for you, you can just drop that last one. I'm hearing Sandra say for her, mental health or mental wellness is the ability to emotionally and mentally cope. Very valid. I think that as well. And I think that's one of the points that I was going to bring up, is just recognizing the difference between, if we were to look at our mental health and wellness on a spectrum, and I think some of the work that I hope to do within this organization and elsewhere is to really normalize our experiences of mental health, and especially right now when we're living in a chaotic, uncertain world and we're having all of these feelings come up, is the importance in recognizing that, we all exist and we're all experiencing this. And our mental health and wellness does exist on a spectrum, or it's not like there are some people who are ill and there are some people who are well. I think that learning to recognize, what my optimal wellness is just as important as thinking about where am I at or what's happening for me when I'm unwell or when I'm in crisis. And so I like to think of those kind of categories of wellness as being, what's my optimal wellness, and kind of like whenever or another word would be when I'm thriving, what's happening, what's going on for me in my world when I feel like I'm thriving. And those that I was using, I feel safe, I kind of feel connected, I feel more balanced. I know, for thinking about also like warning signs or wellness signs, we can think through the lens of like, what are the thoughts that I'm having? What are the feelings that I'm having? How is my body responding? For me, I'm not experiencing, there's an absence of like migraines or headaches or body tension. So when I'm in my wellness zone, like I feel like my body is able to move with more ease, or I'm experiencing more movement in my life, or maybe I'm exercising, etc. When we're moving, so if that optimal wellness is the first kind of zone, and we're thinking about 4 different zones of wellness, the second would be, whenever there are some potential things that are stressful. So I would call the second category stressed and coping. So, this is where we're still functioning. There are some things that are happening for us, but we're able to maintain, like, as Sandra said, some coping mechanisms in place. And I think that's an additional note I'd like to say, is that it's important to recognize and have compassion for ourselves as we move along this spectrum, that how we learn to cope, essentially where we are at in this wellness spectrum is a reflection of our coping mechanisms and how we've learned to cope in the world with everyone's different life experiences. A third category you might call stressed and struggling. So that's whenever you would start to feel some more impairment or disconnection, I would say. And the last category I'm going to offer is unwell crisis. So whenever we're feeling significant impairment or disconnection. So I'll use myself as an example. When I'm starting to experience move from my optimal best place, which certainly it fluctuates, and I'm moving into that second category, things just might, I might start to feel some annoyance come up, or I might start to feel kind of like my edges are a little bit sharper. I might feel some minor anxiety. I might, have difficulty sleeping, for example. I might notice some of my habits changing, but I am feeling still connected to the ground. So when I'm in my coping mechanisms, you know, I'm using some of my coping mechanisms are apparent, but I still feel relatively connected to the ground. For me, one of my hugest warning signs is when my coping mechanisms kind of take it up a notch. And for me personally, I know I can get really obsessive about order and control in my environment. I know that's been something that's been happening for me as I kind of navigate this uncertainty in the world and chaos, which I think is really normal. That if you've noticed that your coping mechanisms have kind of increased or are in overdrive, I would just remind you that, you know, there's a lot of collective anxiety happening right now, and there is there's a feeling of loss of control. So I think that we're doing the best we can with what we have, right? And seeing these, I always loved it. Somebody once phrased coping mechanisms as creative adaptations. And I thought that was a really genius and compassionate way to look at that. So just being mindful about what are my creative adaptations? How do they show up for me in my thoughts? You know, do you have a particular loop or reel that you go through? How do they show up for me in my mood and feeling? Am I more on edge? Am I anxious? Am I angry? Am I sad? How do they show up in my body? You know, do you have particular tensions? How's your digestion? Headache, you know, inflammation, pain, etc. So just learning how to pay attention to all of the information that is there, with the idea of just increasing the awareness and trying our best to curb, you know, cruising straight through from optimal wellness into a crisis situation where we are experiencing significant kind of disconnection, and have less control, maybe I'm not sure if that's the right word, but less options to choose from when we become deeply in our situation of unwellness. Does that make sense to anyone? Is that helpful information to kind of put out there and think about, you know, that we are experiencing, you know, these different kinds of zones across a spectrum, and to be able to learn and identify where we are at it so that we can try to bring ourselves back, learn about our different coping mechanisms, hopefully develop and cultivate some compassion for them, but also be open to thinking about what are the ways in which I can cope and manage, which is a whole other wellness webinar, right? Thanks for sharing, Gregor. I think it's so important to acknowledge, not only because I really think that, you know, the work of destigmatizing is obviously so important, but I think it's important, you know, to validate our experiences and talk openly and get to know ourselves in that way, and to be able to empower ourselves to know kind of who we are and how we react and respond, and to also recognize, you know, that there's not something necessarily wrong with us, you know, but we are a product of learning, right? Learning from our environment. And whenever you put it through the lens of adaptation, you know, it makes sense that we, you know, need to respond to our environment or respond to stress in a particular way. You know, stress is important. We need to be able to respond to stress. So why don't we talk about the next point I had, unless anyone has any questions, feel free to pop in, and I'll just respond to Sandra there. I wasn't aware about inflammation being a sign. I think there's some really interesting research about that. One of the books I'm reading right now that I would suggest in terms of inflammation is When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate. Has anyone ever heard of Gabor Mate? Yeah. So he is a physician, although I'm not sure if he has an active practice anymore. He's based in Vancouver, and he's done a lot of really interesting research. Specifically, he worked in addictions in the kind of right in the belly of it in downtown Eastside Vancouver. And he was seeing a lot of correlations between, he does a lot of work on trauma, essentially, and the manifestation of trauma in one's body. And so the title itself is quite telling, but he's talking about the mind-body connection, essentially, and how inflammation can be connected to stress. So I definitely would recommend that as a read. Does anyone else have any suggestions on that? Feel free to pop in and write. I'm hearing Stacy say, it's just to recognize it at the beginning, not the end for me. I would handle it better earlier than later. Is exactly why I think it's so important, right? Is like, you know, it's, and something, you know, pain isn't necessarily inevitable. Stress isn't inevitable, right? Like it's going to happen. As far as I know, we all experience life. You know, there are obstacles, things are going to happen, but it's about learning how to be aware and to kind of best equip ourselves and to be able to bring ourselves back to ground. I'm seeing Tammy, it's a major sign for me. My body often tells me no before I stop and assess what's going on. Is inflammation what you were talking about, Tammy, I wonder? Yeah, I know. I have seen this time and time again in my own body, and even though, you know, intellectually I get it, it's amazing how our body speaks to us and how much we push ourselves, you know, past the point. I had an experience recently where, you know, I gave myself a headache. My stress level was really high. I was refusing to make any adjustments. So my body, you know, so I was getting tension in my back and I still was refusing. And then I got, you know, this other knot in my back. And it's amazing the information that my body was giving me, and I was refusing to listen. Let's see, the author's name is, here, I'll type it in, Gabor Mate. And Adam has a suggestion, Buddha's Brain by Dr. Chris Hansen. Meditation changes the brain on chemical level. Awesome suggestion. Yeah. Nothing gets me honestly more jazzed up, guys, than talking about meditation and mindfulness when it comes to our mental health and wellness. So I could talk all day about that, but I do think it's certainly worth exploring in terms of, you know, listening and learning about our body's response, and being able to take some power and control into our experience. Realm of Hungry Ghosts is also a really good book by Gabor Mate. I agree, Adam. So when we're talking about these different kinds of support, so moving from recognizing, you know, we have these different kinds of wellness that we experience, these creative adaptations, let's move into talking about the different kinds of supports that we can access along the way. So I see, you know, I see that continuum of wellness, you know, stressed and coping, stressed and struggling, and then, you know, danger zone, kind of like, oh shoot, I've gone too far. And so I think it's really relevant, you know, and all along that way to be learning about your own self-care, like what works for you. I think that that is applicable all across the line. I think that social care as well, thinking about getting support from different relationships, friends, family, community that you might have. Again, those are all applicable across the board. I think it's important to note that I do recommend that you and encourage you to seek professional support. Again, any time along the way. I have a therapist that I'm so grateful for. And I, you know, I try to do work with them, not just when I'm in crisis, but to do some kind of maintenance work along the way. and to each their own in terms of what kind of professional support works for you. It could be the peer support that I mentioned. It could be a spiritual practice, mentor, but seeking outside help through a clinical space, through a psychotherapist, through a group. Exploring that, I think, throughout our spectrum is helpful. But I definitely would like to say that once we get into the realm of crisis, I think that's a no-brainer, that we really need to get comfortable with asking for help. And I'll leave you some resources near the end for that. For the time being, when we're talking about different things we can do for ourselves, when I think of, I would love, I'm seeing a question here from Tracy Lynn. What can you do when you have an overactive brain and meditation does not work? Yeah, I've been there. I'm curious about, I guess that for me brings up, Tracy Lynn, what you think the goal of meditation is. So I think that's a really good question, right? And I know that for me, it took me a while to figure out, it's still an ongoing process for me to just kind of accept that this is some time I'm carving out for myself, and whatever happens in here is going to happen. But I know that when I was learning about meditation, I was thinking, it's all about like clearing your brain and like making this space, and I'm going to have this Buddha brain where like nothing's happening and I'm enlightened. And that is just not the case. So for me, there are definitely days where, it feels different than other days. There are some days where I feel like I am more connected to the ground. And there are other days where I'm like, okay, well, I did my practice and that's good enough for me. But I certainly would say, and maybe in the book that Adam had suggested earlier, but what I do know is that it does take there definitely are increased benefits the more you practice. So the more time that you do spend, I don't know if it's fair to say the easier it becomes. I'm wondering if anyone else has any tips or tricks in that regard. My encouragement would to be, I've been trying for 3 years. Yeah. It's tough. It's really tough to, if you want to quiet yourself. Yeah. So I'm wondering what it would be like for you to revisit what your intentions and goals are with your practice. Movement works better. That's Gregor says, for me, meditation with movement works better. That's a really good suggestion. Yeah, that there are different ways to practice for sure. Adam has a group. He's running a group meditation 3 times weekly via live stream. So that's awesome. I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, I would explore maybe just, I feel compelled to just encourage some compassion for yourself. And I don't consider myself a meditation expert. Maybe I should have said that in the beginning. But I can definitely relate to the feeling of like frustration with the practice. Yeah. Tammy has something to say as well. I was going to say the same. Yoga helped me connect the two. So using the supportive movement. Yeah. And maybe, I'm not sure, I know for me, I use like a facilitator or a guide. I did a bit of shopping around, and the person that resonated for me is John Kabat-Zinn. So I consider there's more than one way, but certainly I think of it as there's like a facilitated approach, and there's what I call freestyling. Freestyling for me is really difficult, to just sit in silence and to guide myself. I consider that more challenging. What I do find really supportive is having a structured voice to kind of help me along the way and help bringing me back using different kinds of focus of anchors, whether it's the breath, whether it's the thought, whether it's sound, whether it's touch, whether it's movement.
Could you add that name into the chat box for me, please, Mary?
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Kabat-Zinn is a really well-known pioneer of mindfulness meditation, particularly non-secular mindfulness practice. And he has a really soothing voice. I find his audio and practice really super helpful. So I am just mindful of the time. So are we okay to continue to scoot along? Yeah. If you have any more questions about that, it sounds like maybe you could hook up with Adam, who has a local group. The page AcuFlow Wellness. Yeah, cool. Or feel free to message me. And as I said, I'm very passionate talking about this. We also at CMHA, maybe this is a good time to do a plug. We will be doing some self-care sessions, talking about self-care, having more of a discussion specifically all around self-care for Mental Health Week, which is next week. And so we'll be having kind of a video a day, and we'll be having a live Facebook Live at the end of the week talking about self-care. So that will be a great place to pop into if you want to have continue the discussion about different kinds of tips, tricks, practices, just to kind of connect with some more folks. So yeah. And then looks like Startup Zone, Tracy Brio, Reset Breathe. She did a previous wellness webinar. She's another great resource when it comes to meditation and movement, and her website is there. And I'm seeing Adam say acupuncturist. He is. I started the meditation since I can't take patients during lockdown. Great alternative. I hope that you continue it. Anyhow, when we're talking about self-care, I will just take this opportunity to maybe frame it in a way, at least that makes sense to me, and perhaps gives you folks something to think about, and feel free to add. But I think and please feel free to pop into the chat box, what does self-care mean to you? Is there something in particular that how you define that? For me, as I kind of alluded to earlier, when I'm thinking about taking care of myself and my mental health and wellness, I'm thinking about tending to and respecting the needs I have, the needs of my body, mind, heart, and spirit. So through that particular lens, there are different strategies and approaches that you can take. Especially relevant right now for me, practical self-care. So having structure, having a routine, having some sense of stability, ritual. So kind of Tracy, what I was talking about with in terms of my meditation, creating a time in the day, carving it out, making it a practice. That in and of itself, no matter how the practice goes, I find really supportive, knowing that I can build it into my day. So there's practical types of self-care, and then of course there are special ways, special kinds of care. So those kind of experience or moments of indulgence, and those kind of soothing activities that we have. So when we're talking about self-care, it's kind of activities that help you find meaning and support your growth and groundedness is what I would say. And self-soothing would be a type of self-care. So soothing being, they might be activities that provide distraction and or comfort in difficult times. And so I think that's a really good asterisk, that self-soothing can be really valuable and also something to watch. For me, sometimes I need to shut off and tune out, and I think that that's okay to acknowledge, and also recognizing when my shutting off is kind of becoming a slippery slope into unwellness, when it's no longer serving me but rather might be harming me. Does that make sense? Understanding the difference, like understanding the benefits of being able to soothe as a form of self-care, and as well as understanding how potentially we can sabotage ourselves with that soothing.
What were the two kinds, practical and?
Practical and special. So I have a list here of 3 different things, and they're kind of as like a yin and yang energy. So the first set I gave you was that we can explore self-care in practical ways and special ways. Practical ways being, doing chores, making the bed, having a budget, having a routine, all of that stuff that really sets us up in our environment. Structure, stability, rituals, all of the really grounding practical things. Those are all forms of self-care. I like to think of it, when I make the bed in my morning, that's an act of self-care to my future self. Because every time I come into the room or later at night, I'm like, oh, that's really nice. Like, it feels nice to get into a bed that's been cared for. And then, of course, the special ways, which would be, like taking time, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with finances or money or luxury, but something for you that feels special and extraordinary. I think we deserve and we need to have those things. The second set that I'd like to offer up in terms of different strategies or ways to think of self-care would be using our senses, so sensory ways, and creative ways. So by sensory ways, I mean cultivating stillness, using our senses. So essentially what Tracy and I were talking about, and Adam, about mindfulness practice. So using our senses to cultivate presence. And
So would that mean, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I seem to be the one who keeps doing it. But when you talk about sensory, do you mean something like smelling something really good, like a fresh batch of cookies or flowers or oils, like things like that, that maybe heighten to make you feel better?
Sure, that's exactly what I mean.
Okay.
Yeah, I see that as a
Perfect.
huge opportunity, to use our senses, all of our senses, to use those as an opportunity for connection, for grounding. Going back to the definition of self-care being things that can help you find meaning and support, things that can support your growth and groundedness. So using our senses as a tool and a strategy. The second part of that would be creative ways. So expression. So if we're using our senses to cultivate mindfulness and stillness and presence, then the other side of that would be, what about movement and expression? So using our creativity to cultivate some feelings of joy, or to support yourself in that way. Did you have a question, Tracy?
I was just hoping you would elaborate on the creativity. Like, I know you're saying expression, movement, so like dancing or stretching.
Yeah. I mean,
but when I think of creativity, I think of art, of painting, so are we talking creativity in the sense of expression body, or are we talking about the entire word of creativity?
Yep, I think the entire thing. These are just starting points, and I don't really think there's any wrong answer. But I think that thinking about different ways in which we can evoke feelings of contentment, peace, joy, groundedness, support, connection are all good. So there's definitely no wrong way. I think when I think of creativity, I do think of it through an artistic lens in one way, which I think it can be a great source for many people. But I think of, moving my body. I think of, moving my body in a different way. I can be creative with how I'm experiencing my body. I can be creative with how I am expressing my thoughts and feelings. So just as a suggestion for a complete category where the opportunities are really endless. I hope that makes sense. I'm just going to check in with the chat here. Washing the dishes with intention. Love that, Sandra. Mindfulness practice. Stacy says 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can taste, 2 things you feel, 1 thing you can smell. So that's an excellent grounding technique for sure. Sandra's also sharing when she lost her brother, she discovered jigsaw puzzles, my only true way to escape and feel present. I love that. I think that's talking again about, you know, so sometimes there is like movement feels really good, this expressive energy, and sometimes we need stillness and we need, you know, even like a sense of, I know for me, it's kind of like a sense, I'm thinking of what it would be like to do a jigsaw puzzle, something that doesn't require a lot of thought, I guess. Maybe that's one of the big differences, right? Something that's easy, where there's a lot of flow, there's like a bit of mindlessness to it to be able to stay grounded. And then there's things that require a kind of an output of energy. Peaceful. Awesome. So I just wanted to, we just have a few minutes left in our session, and I just wanted to end with one more piece to think about in terms of self-care before touching on some resources specific online, local and CMHA resources when it comes to this particular time frame we're all in. And the last piece is just thinking about different activities we can do with ourselves. So what are some activities that you know, we have a need for connection with ourselves. So opportunities for introspection, reflection, personal growth, you know, so thinking about self-care through that kind of having a date with yourself or having that opportunity to cultivate that relationship with self. And we also have a need for connection with others. So building those things, both of those things, recognizing the importance of both of those. So relationship with myself, what kind of activities help me cultivate that relationship with self, and as well as recognizing the importance of being connected with others, friends, family, community. So again, feel free to drop me a line, or if you want to talk more about any of the topics that to date. I know that this is a lot of, you know, we have a specific amount of time and there's a lot that we could talk about that came up. But just for our last few minutes here, I will just make a referral and a reference to, so first of all, when it comes to resources, CMHA has launched an info hub. So that is, it has, what does it have? It has, it's an ongoing active portal. I'm gonna, in 1 second, I'll drop into the chat box and give you the link. Essentially, it's a virtual hub, it's a website, and it has categories of support and resources, local, online, and elsewhere. So covering mental health resources, resources within PEI, within the community, such as like telephone lines to call and chat with people, community initiatives, volunteer programs, all of this is in the COVID era, of course, specific. Resources for income, resources for housing, resource stuff. So let's see if I can just, I'm gonna pop in here. So this is an ongoing resource, as I said. They've done a pretty good job, and so our staff is consistently like, you know, there's a lot of information out there. I do get that for sure. I have been overwhelmed myself. So we're doing our best to curate and bring it all into one place with different kind of categories for folks to navigate. www. CMHA. So in addition to this online resource, if that worked, we do have this telephone service. So myself and a few other staff members, we do have a dedicated mental health resource line. So if, you know, you're not able to find what you need to on this info hub, you are absolutely welcome to call us or refer anyone else to call. This is a phone line that's staffed by CMHA Monday to Friday business hours, I think 8:30 to 4:30, and we will do our best to kind of help you answer questions, navigate you to the resource that you need. I'm going to just put that number in here, 1-800-682-1648. And what you will find on there is that what is important to know is that we are still open, so we are still offering virtual telephone services. Our peer support program, they're doing their sessions via telephone. They also have an online group. You can find the info for that there. And then all of the community mental health and addiction, so the government provincial programming, if you aren't already aware, they are still operating. They still have, they've moved their walk-in mental health clinics to be call-in clinics. And so you can find resources on the Info Hub or reach out, or it's on the government website. But essentially there's one of those mental health call-in clinics almost every day of the week. As well, there are a few other online programs that have started up. So I would just make some suggestions to, I've been, and we've been curating and putting this all into the Info Hub, so I encourage you to check it out. But certainly what's been helpful for me is leaning into and exploring. There's a lot available right now in terms of online communities, groups. I've been doing, trying to include some more positive news in my life. So just thinking about all of the different areas that we, take in information and seeing if we need to do any modifications, and adding in some happy news, some positive news, some different resources for care. I'm wondering if anyone has any. I know that we are super short on time. I am open to last comments and feedback.
I actually have a question. With all this information that you were so wonderful to provide with us today, including the people who mentioned the books, and Adam who mentioned his what was it called? Acupuncture Flow Wellness on Facebook. Are those things that it'd be okay for us to put on our, say, work page for our clients and for our sponsors so that they have this information as well? Would that be okay with both you, Mary, and Adam? Would that be okay to share that information with our people?
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
Sure. Yeah, we'd love that. Is there anyone else who'd like to pop in, and or feel free to leave a comment and I can always get back to you. Again, I'll just, so that it's fresh, I'll leave my email here at the bottom. I'm happy to continue the conversation. And I'm really thankful for everyone who popped in today and chatted and shared, and hope I didn't overwhelm you with information, but that perhaps, we got our brains kind of juicing and thinking about different opportunities. And yeah, I hope that you all stay well and connected to resources, and so glad to see you all in here. Anything, Rachel, for you to close off with?
I don't think so, no. If no one else has any questions, I think that was awesome, Mary. It was really great to hear from you, and really great to see what we can do moving forward. Just making sure our companies are connected to you guys and your resources as well. I know I just sent the resource page that you sent out to our Slack. So hopefully that gets around and it's helpful for folks. But yeah, it was great to hear you share today, and great to have everyone come out.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Mary.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Enjoy the snow.